Fantastic. I just want to welcome everybody as they're starting to come into the waiting room. My name's Darren Schober. I'm going to be your host today for Maze Beyond the Treatment Table. Our topic is operational metrics. So I think as you come in, I've got my chat box open. My expert colleague, Randy Bolt, is with me. I encourage everybody, Randy and I really want to see everybody. So if you can turn your video cameras on, that's always good. We want this thing to be relational. If you've got a follow-up question, you could start queuing your questions up right now in the chat space. We're accepting all questions. Hopefully they're all operational metrics related, or otherwise we're going to have to pass on them. Just a couple other items. Background noise, obviously stay muted until you have something that you wanna say. This one's going to be a little bit unique also. You guys are going to be a little bit interactive. I'm gonna throw a poll up right away because it's important that Randy and I recognize what type of business you're doing. Are you 100% cash? Are you insurance and cash? So we're really going to ask everybody just to kind of give a quick answer to this poll. And while you're doing that, I'm going to pass the baton over to Randy. Let him introduce himself. He is the CFO of Rock Valley. We are very fortunate to have Randy. He's a very skilled and talented, smart gentleman for Rock Valley as a CFO. So Randy, why don't you take it over and let us know what you do at Rock Valley in a day and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sounds good, Darren. Thanks. Yeah, so I graduated from University of Iowa, and believe it or not, in 1994. That makes me pretty old. Started at Rock Valley that year, and I never left. So I've only worked at one organization. When I got to Rock Valley, we had three clinics and about 12 therapists. And now we have about 65 locations and about 600 employees. So had a huge increase over the time that I've been here. Started as PT and over time worked towards administration, and I haven't seen patients since COVID. So I am the CFO. What that means for me is I oversee our billing office, I oversee our accounting team, I oversee our HR department, I oversee our IT department. Those are the areas that I oversee, but I'm involved in a lot of the operations meetings with other colleagues as well. So I guess I'll do my best to answer questions that I can, and when I don't know or I don't have a very good answer, I'm going to pass it back to Darren and see what he's got for you.
We may pass it back to our audience and see if we can get it answered. Who knows? Okay, again, just a reminder, if you're just coming in, the chat box is open. Please throw some operational metric questions in there. Unmute yourself if you've got a follow-up question, but by all means, put your cameras on. We want to see your lovely faces. And Kat is monitoring any questions that are kind of coming in that'll kick this discussion off. Does anybody have any that they even want to unmute and throw out there? Don't be shy. Otherwise, Randy and I will take off on a deep, dark hole and you never know.
So I was just involved.
When you ask a question and are hoping somebody will say something, I don't have any specific questions right off the bat. I'm always kind of interested in seeing what others feel are most useful, most helpful KPIs, metrics to monitor, that sort of thing. I'm sure that as I hear some of the discussion, questions will come to mind.
Yeah, David, I think that's a great question. If you had to pick your top 5 KPIs, right? What would those be on a day-to-day basis to know what the tempo is of your individual clinic? Yeah. Before we do that, David, Kat, do we have any? Can you show the results of our poll here too, just to get a sense of where everybody's at? Okay, so that's interesting. So a third of this group is solely 100% insurance. Another third of this group is 75% insurance. There's a 10% roughly of insurance, and then there's 22% are no insurance, 100% cash based. And that's That's awesome to know because I think these KPIs, I'll let you take this, Randy, but why don't you talk about your top 5 KPIs, both on the cash level as well as on the insurance level?
Yeah, so I think from my perspective, the very top level KPIs in my mind are cost per visit and revenue per visit. Okay, because I think if you put those two together, that leads to your margin, your net income. And I think ultimately for a practice, as you manage your practice, that's the most important thing to be able to get to. There's a lot of operational metrics that might lead to either one of those. So, as we budget in our organization, and we try to use our budget to guide monthly meetings, quarterly meetings, and guide our corporate goals, as we try to set a budget that would lead to the revenue per visit or would lead to total revenue. And so when you think about the KPIs, I'd start with number of evaluations, because that at the very top are the patients that are coming into your door that you have the opportunity to earn revenue from. From there, the question would be is how many times does each of those patients come back to you? So visits per eval. And if you're not managing that, sometimes you can increase your evaluations, but as your visits per eval comes down, essentially you don't have more revenue. And so it's really important then to track from an eval to the visits per eval. We all see patients in a certain amount of time. Our schedules are either usually 30 minutes or 45 minutes or an hour or 40 minutes. And so you should have an expectation on the number of procedures per visit. And that's the kind of stuff that on a monthly basis, you can track back and say, hey, we expected to be here. We're not here. How can we make changes? But as you look at procedure per visit, then we break that down into timed and untimed. Timed meaning those are the ones that we think really drive our revenue. They're the active procedure codes that we're spending time with patients, and time with patients results in billable charges, which results in revenue. And so, as you go down that list, I think those metrics are the most important to lead to the top line revenue and revenue per visit. So that's the direction I would go with that, Darren, is those are the most important ones to me.
And speaking a little bit to if you were 100% cash-based practice, a lot of those metrics, Randy, would be very similar. Instead of procedures, you just want to base what is your income based on the time that you're spending with that.
Yeah, most people in cash base, I think, are charging on a visit basis. Yeah. So your procedures is a little bit out the door, and you're looking at revenue per visit. Still looking at total number of visits to get there. Yep.
David, that was a great question. Is there a follow-up or other questions that are coming in our chat box? I would say the other interesting KPI on that one too, Randy, is how busy is your clinic, right? What is your schedule density, or how much white space do you have out there? Are you filling the time that you do have available?
Yep. I think so. Elizabeth has a comment in the chat box. It says same cost per visit. So cost per visit, and as it relates to the visits and cost is so important, because what drives our practice's cost per visit? It's wages and benefits. I pulled this up just before I walked in here, just to see what this was so I could share it. In the last 3 years, our wages and benefits at Rock Valley, the last 3 years adds up to somewhere between 71 and 73% of our revenue. And so by far, our biggest driver of cost is wages and benefits. We try to manage all the other costs. We do the best we can with those, and we manage those down because it is important, because it still represents cost. But when you think about the biggest change you can make in your practice is you can become more efficient with patients. So we look at visits, as an operational metric, we look at visits per clinical hour. And so if, our expectation in our organization is that a therapist sees about 10.5 patients per day if they're full-time. And that breaks down to 1.31 visits per clinical hour. And it's unbelievable the difference between actually achieving that and being around 1.2 visits per clinical hour. It's a huge difference in net profit, because it's all profit, right? And if you can actually exceed that efficiency, it's a really big deal. So how can how can you make your practice more efficient with seeing patients? How can you make it easier to see more patients? I think that's something that we're striving to do in order to increase our margin in our business.
After you think the cost of your benefits and your people, break those categories down a little bit more for us then, Randy.
Yep. So did you want to guide that a little more, Darren, or?
Yeah, more, you obviously like facility and then you're fixed and unfixed a little bit.
Yep. So we've got, how we break ours down. And again, you guys, I can tell you this from overseeing accounting for a lot of years. The more expensive software I've been able to buy, the better I've been able to represent our costs per visit. So if you have a really small practice, sometimes it's hard to get to some of this stuff. So you have to be really intentional about thinking about how you set up your general ledger so that it actually spits out what you're hoping it will spit out. And you don't have to do a lot of calculations on the back end to the extent that it takes so much work to get to a metric that you decide not to look at it. So I think, one of the advice I'd give you guys is as you work on your business or as you think about working on your business, spend time, when you can make that time, spend time thinking about how you can organize your accounting system so that you can get the information that you would like to get without doing too much work. And I think you can, if you guys have an accountant that works with you, or if you have somebody that does that for you, that's something that you could really work on, is to make these categories a little bit easier to look at. We used to be in Sage 50. I know a lot of people are in QuickBooks. Now we're on an accounting software called Sage Intacct, which gives us a lot more flexibility, but I think it's important. So we look at our expenses. So wage and benefit is the first one. We separate those out. So we know really clearly what percentage of our revenue is coming from wage and benefits. We then break it down to facility expense. So we actually lump together the costs that are related to a facility, such as rent, utilities, telephone, internet, property maintenance, things like that, laundry. We lump those together so we can really identify at each of our locations, what is the expense, and is that something we need to manage better? Or is that something we need to decide to switch a location because the cost is too high? And so I think a lot of that is good to have it lumped together. We looked at supplies separately. So supplies to take care of patients, supplies in the front office. We look at IT materials separately. So again, we're looking at kind of the big categories that might drive our supply or cost on that side. We look at our EMR fees separately and our clearinghouse fees separately. So we separate that out so we know exactly what that costs us. I would say if you can't separate it out, you're probably not going to manage it. So it just gives you, if you can separate that out and you can get to a point of seeing a cost per visit or a cost as a percentage of the revenue, it will help you over time see which costs are going up, which costs are going down, and it'll help you decide which ones to manage. And then lastly, we lump together kind of more of what we call our corporate office costs, things that are indirect costs like maybe legal fees, liability insurance, some of our credit card fees or our bank service charges, those sorts of fees that really are unrelated to the direct expense of seeing a patient. We separate those out. So that's kind of how we break out our fees, our expenses. And I would say, as we look at it, the things that are the highest, I mean, if you look at our expenses, rent is about 6.77% for us of revenue. So after wages and benefits, rent is the highest category. After that, literally, we don't have any expenses that represent more than 1.5% of our revenue. So a lot of expenses that are small, only a few expenses that are big.
Thanks, Randy. Elizabeth, you can shoot out in the chat. Did that any follow-up question for Randy?
Well, all of that was really helpful. It was a misunderstanding though. I was responding to your comment, I think, about the for a cash-based business, that it's the same cost for every visit. So yep. I wasn't asking about the cost per visit. It was just me putting it in there in a really bad way that wasn't clear. But yes, all of that was very helpful.
Well, good. I guess you caused me to talk for about 30 minutes about nothing. So hey, there you go.
Not nothing. It was all
It was all excellent, Randy. And Elizabeth, would you agree when you look at breaking out even though being in a cash-based practice, would you share some of that same comment that Randy did on breaking out your accounting a little bit?
Yeah, it all matched really closely. I mean, by far the wages are the highest by far. Rent's next for us as well, and then everything else is well below, in that 1 to 2% range or below. So very similar breakdown for all of those.
Awesome.
And I just reiterate that, on that cost side, since it is our highest, that wage and benefits, like there's a lot of ways to decrease your wage and benefit expense. You could think about a lot of ways. You could start hiring more assistants, or you could have more unlicensed personnel seeing patients, or you could do a lot of different things. You could cut staff. All of those things are true, but the easiest thing, and the most desirable thing is to be more efficient with patients when you see them, because that will have a direct impact on that cost per visit. So I just say that's where we focus most of our conversation when it comes to wages and benefits, is how can we become more efficient, especially when you think about what's happening with the payment environment. We all know that Medicare is paying us less this year. I think we're at 5 years in a row where we've had a decrease. I read some material that in the last 5 years, we've had a 29% decrease inflation adjusted Medicare payment over the last 5 years. So 29% less in payment. Well, that means we need to be more efficient, because our cost per visit has to come down if we're going to continue to take Medicare. And there's a lot of things we can do. We can increase the payment from the other payers if that's possible. But realistically, we've got to do a good job on being efficient. And I think going into the future, that's the one thing I would say that I see, is that I don't see that getting a lot better. I just don't see the government coming up with a lot more money for physical therapists. So we might see some positive changes. I'm hopeful. I'm just not confident. So I know the one thing we can control is how we treat patients, what we do with patients, and how we manage our staff. We probably can't control the Medicare payment so well. So Elizabeth has a cash-based business, so that's awesome, because you're separate from Medicare, right? So that's a positive in a way.
Does anybody have any follow-up for Randy on that topic, or additional question? Oh, there's one popping in from a Natasha. Go ahead, Randy.
So the best way to set your fee schedule. So yeah, it's a really good question. And Natasha, are you seeing insurance?
Yes, right now just Blue Cross Blue Shield. I'm in Michigan. And then I have access to Medicare, but just right now we're just credentialed with them.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
PCN.
I would, so if you're new and you haven't set your fee schedule before, I would start with the concept of, so there's one rule that's very important, is that you always charge more than your best payer pays you. Okay. So if you have one payer that pays you a significant amount of money, you want to make sure that you're recouping all the money that they have offered to pay you through a network contract. So you always have to set your fees higher than the best payer. That's probably one thing to keep in mind. I would, if I was starting over, I didn't set our fee schedule originally, and I've managed over time to try to get it to this point. But what we do is we consistently have an increase in our fee schedule. So we do that every 2 years in our organization. So I would consistently increase your fees, because there's going to be a percentage of contracts that go up. There's going to be that will benefit you over time to do that. The other thing that, typically I would probably do if I set it up from scratch is I would mimic the Medicare fee schedule, because so much comes off the Medicare fee schedule. So if you look at the RVUs, or you can probably get down to the fee schedule itself, is mimic that, but set that at a certain percentage higher, so that it's higher than your best payer. So, if Theract pays better than manual, for example, so you'll always set your fee schedule so that Theract is better than manual. Now, when that doesn't work, is what happens is over time, the Medicare may change how they pay us. So if someday manual all of a sudden becomes more than Theract, your fee schedule might be a little bit upside down. So you might have to make individual adjustments over time. But I would start with the Medicare fee schedule, a percentage above that, so that you recoup all the payment that people are willing to pay you.
Thanks. That was very helpful.
Any follow-up at all, Natasha, on that? There was some good information there.
I guess the only thing would be like, for example, I can per unit, I can just set what that dollar amount is. Is there a limit where they say, okay, this is, you can't charge us that?
Not that I'm aware of. I've never heard of that.
Okay.
So you could set it really high, but you know, the only thing that you do is upset your patients that say, I can't believe how much you're charging. So
Right.
there's probably no value to go too high.
Right.
Because,
Yeah.
you know,
I hear
and
you.
there might be times that, although this is rare, there might be times when an insurance would deny a payment and make it patient responsibility. And then if you set that fee schedule exorbitantly high, that fee may come through the patient, and then you'd have to make that decision at that time. Do I really want to charge a patient this entire amount if your fee schedule is extremely high? So it might lead to a few things down the road if you set it too high, but those are things you can deal with.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
You're welcome. Other questions to throw into our chat? Great information, Randy. Wow, you guys are being kind of quiet today for a Wednesday before Memorial Day weekend. Randy, one of the things that jumped into my mind as a metric, and when you were talking with Natasha about some of the other poorer payers, we tend to call them red payers. Are there metrics that you're doing at the clinic level on controlling some of your lower based payers into your clinics on a routine basis? Are you starting to adopt some metrics around what you'll allow into your clinic, what you can allow into your clinic in order to functionally or financially maintain integrity?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if any metrics in particular, but we are paying very close attention to what our pay per visit is by insurance carrier. Okay, and so I just did a talk for PPS that was a little bit about contracting and maybe how to go about contracting. And so we start with just big picture. We start with financial service class. So that would be like Medicare, Medicaid, commercial payers, workers' compensation, motor vehicle. So we would separate those financial service classes, and within those classes, we determine what is our pay per visit for each class. Okay, and every state's a little bit different. You know, from my state, we see motor vehicle pay the best. My states, we see motor vehicle pay the best. We see work comp pay the second best. You know, then we go to commercial, and then all of our government contracts in my states are less than that. So we know what to expect when we look at payers based on the class that they're in. And then what we do is we take that class and we break it down to the insurance carriers within that class. So for example, we have 330 insurance carriers that paid us in the last 6 months across our organization. We have somewhere around 60 in workers' comp. Okay. So within workers' compensation, let's just say our average was $140 a visit in workers' compensation. We might see a range of somewhere between 120 and 200. And so if you look at it that way, it allows you to look at the payers that fall to the bottom of your class, and it helps you identify which payers you want to renegotiate with. I would say consistently, it's not a metric, but it would be some advice, is that to always, when you pull those classes open and you look at them, always have a process by which you renegotiate with your lower payers in the class, and you want to bring them up. And I would also say that some of the better payers that actually pay you more per visit are doing that because they don't have great network adequacy, or they really need you. And so they may pay you more too. So don't just focus on the bottom payers, but that's a good starting point because those are the ones that are bringing down your payment per visit. So I think from our standpoint, if you're in network, and depending on what your contract says, more than likely you've agreed to take patients that walk in your door if you're in network. You know, I've heard a lot of organizations say that they're limiting their panel to, for example, a certain number of Medicare patients. I'm not going to speak to the legalities of any of that stuff. I think you got to look at your contract and make sure that you feel comfortable doing what you want to do. But you could talk about limiting your panel within a certain payer class in order to limit the actual number of patients that you accept with a certain kind of insurance. Again, you would want to check your contract for that, but that's a way to potentially limit the number of patients that you take. So if you have an unlimited number of patients and you want to increase the dollar per visit, then you want to think about, okay, so how do I either leave the network or how do I limit the panel so that I'm not seeing so many of the poor payers and I allow my therapist to see better paying patients. That's kind of, I think, if you're systematic about it, and if you look at a class and you look at the insurances within the class, I think you'll understand really well pretty quickly. If you can get that detail, you're going to understand pretty quickly who you should be thinking about not working with or renegotiating with. And I think that's really important. That's another thing I just say when you take time to work on your business. Those are things that are really important to your top line revenue and will probably drive your success down the road. And I think those are hard to do things, but really important. And once you get that process in place for renegotiation, just be really consistent with it. So I think the first time's the hardest to actually organize your data. And once you organize it, you're going to rerun reports, the same reports that you ran last time. You're going to update your data, and most of that data doesn't change a lot over time. Your contracts don't change quickly, right? So you can see payment increase or decrease over time, but it's a little change. So it really does help to be organized and to be able to plan your renegotiation.
For those of you on this call that are billing insurance, I'm going to drop a reference to Randy's presentation or contracting module into the chat, so you can look that up through the Learning Center for future reference on that too. Any follow-up on that discussion from our crew? Other topics? Go ahead.
Do you guys feel like, maybe you can give me some input. Do you feel like you've been successful with renegotiating your contracted rates with insurance? Anybody want to share if they feel like they're successful and maybe what helped with that? Or is anybody are you renegotiating?
Just again, so it's not so difficult on your end to get people talking. We have just recently had some success. I hate to even admit it, but with United Healthcare, we've had talks with Optum. We're part of a network, sort of a co-op of clinics called Northwest Rehab Alliance, and United Healthcare hadn't changed our reimbursement for over 15 years. It's been stuck at the equivalent of reimbursing us for 2 units of care. And our network made the decision to finally, with the administrative burdens they have as well, to go out or to just drop the contract and to formally submit. And they formally submitted a month or so ago. It stays in place till July 1st, that we're still under contract, but immediately when the network submitted that, they started writing day one probably to members. I don't know if they wrote to all members or those that they especially needed, and said, hey, just sign this so you can stay in contract with us. And we basically, well, I talked to the representative and said we were actually planning to go out before we knew the network was going out. We have no plans to re-sign with the way things are. We've been stuck at this rate for over 15 years, and it's completely unreasonable. And so ultimately they came back. I won't say how much or anything, because I guess you're not supposed to, but they came back considerably more for the commercial plans anyway than we've been at. And sort of, you just feel like saying, well, why didn't you just do that to begin with? But making sure, still haven't signed the contract, just making sure everything's kosher. I kind of went back and forth. I submitted what the cost of living has done over the last 15 years and that sort of thing. And I asked for the moon, knowing it wouldn't come close to that. But they came down, and I found out from the director of our network that ours was the highest they've seen. And I think part of it is because we're sort of in a landlocked peninsula area, and we are in all the major towns within the peninsula. We have close to 100 providers, and we cover pretty much all the subspecialties in the industry. So I think there's a number of factors that had influence on that. And then another one was
Hey, hold tight right there, David. I'm
Yeah.
gonna pause you right there. But hey, Randy, can you speak? You know, David's talking about a group of private practices that have band together in an organized network. Again, looking at one of the questions in the chat, Randy, what would be your advice to some of those smaller practices that just feel like they have absolutely no voice, or where even to get started?
Yeah. So, and I saw Andrew's question there. You don't know where to start, for example. So I think I think you start with your data, first of all. Okay. Which insurances, after you look at your data and you find out your pay per visit by the carriers, which ones do you want to approach? And I always tell people this: if you don't ask them for more, you will not get paid more. Like, that's just not going to change. So the first step is to find out how to. You might have to make a few phone calls to get to contracting, but every insurance carrier has a contracting division that works with providers. So you have to reach out. If you don't ask, you won't get an increase, and I think that's ultimately number one. So, and when you renegotiate, you just have to let them know that your expenses have gone up. I mean, realistically, your ask is, I need to get paid a higher rate for my services. I'd like to renegotiate. They expect that phone call. They hear it hundreds of times. Contractors hear it all the time, right? And so normally they're going to take that back and they're going to listen to you, and they won't give you an answer on the phone, but they're going to ask you for some information, you know, your tax ID and all the different things, and they might ask you what services that you provide that are a benefit to them. So you might want to know your specialties. You might want to have a sense if you're seeing pediatrics or lymphedema or pelvic floor or things that might be a specialty that they don't have adequacy in otherwise. And if you're in a rural area, you might be the only provider in town. That's really important to share that information. Sometimes the contractor doesn't know who you are or where you're at, and it takes a while to look it up. So I think sharing that helps. So I'd always say, start with what do you think your positive attributes for that payer are, because they need you as much as you need them. They just won't act like it because they're professional negotiators. But they need a network, and they need their patients to be taken care of, because next year when employers renew their contracts, if they're getting complaint after complaint about no network, they leave them. And so it does matter that they have a network. So I would say you got to start somewhere. So I'd organize your payers, pick the bottom, and I'd make a phone call and start there. And if you have this process in place, maybe you make 2 phone calls a month, or two pairs a month, where you just start it and it's a continual process. And it might take you 6 months to actually get the contract. But so it's not quick and it's never easy. But you got to stay at it. That's my advice on that. So yeah. And I, David, you talked about United Healthcare. I'd say, like, on this talk, let's not talk about any particular payers, but what I would tell you is that payers are renegotiating. Okay. If you look at publicly traded companies, you'll see that they're having success renegotiating contracts. It's in their public reports. If you just anecdotally talk to other practice owners, you're hearing they're having success. So now is the time to ask for it. Everybody knows we just went through a huge amount of inflation. Everybody knows that Medicare is coming down. We all need to get paid a little more. And so now is a good time to renegotiate.
Thank you.
Yep, you bet. I see Amy Schneider on the call. So Amy, what do you think?
Hi guys. I love that you guys are doing this. This is so great. I love the name of it too, Beyond the Treatment Table. Um, I would just echo what you just said, Randy. Like, I don't know what the algorithm is, but persistent seems to like be annoying. Just keep asking is how I think we've been successful. We've tried photo, outcomes, network adequacy. Like, I don't know what the algorithm is, but persistent, and we have seen it change. You just got to keep. So often I just hear practice owners like, we just can't, we just lose, right? Like we're all high achievers or we wouldn't be doing this. So who wants to keep going and failing? But in my experience, that's kind of what it took, was just keep asking, just ask again. 6 months later, ask again. Don't go away. Believe in yourself, believe in your practice, believe in the value you are providing, and just keep asking.
And ultimately, you can go out of network.
Yes.
Okay, you got to make that determination, but that ultimately is the one. That's the one thing you hold that they can't. You know, if they do need network adequacy and you do represent a piece of that to them, that does matter. So none of us want to go out of network, but that's definitely something that you could do. You're going to have more leverage if you're willing to go out of network. That seems like that's straightforward, because you actually ultimately can do something that could potentially hurt them. But if you're not willing to go out of network, you can ask. They might say no. Next year you ask again, and they might say yes. So I think, to Amy's point, I think that persistence is really important.
To where I think Darren was going to with the question that we are looking at in our practice is, the percent that some of these payers are of our practice. And so can we somehow limit, can we still be equitable in how we provide care, put the patients in the middle of every decision we make, and somehow manipulate that payer mix a little bit, with when we have wait lists and high volumes. So it's a tough question, but it's something that we're asking in our practice of how can we do that so that the risk doesn't feel so high if we do want to go out of network with some of these bottom payers. Can we decrease the percent of volume we have there before we make that call?
I almost want to ask our cash-based practices on this call. They have to be worried too. How you're looking at your fees on a routine basis and adjusting for inflation and different costs that you're having. Is Elizabeth still on our call? Maybe she'd, or anybody that would jump into how they approach that routinely. I may have scared everybody from jumping on. Thanks, Amy. Great discussion. Other questions or follow-ups to the one we're currently in?
I see a question from Sarah, and I'll speak to that. She's in a cash-based business, very small, trying to decide if she will take insurance. And so I'm going to tell you that from our perspective, so Rock Valley has always taken insurance. I think for us, it's really hard to go from taking insurance to cash-based. I think there's a struggle there. If you're brand new and you start in cash, you're in a great position because you've never relied on insurance to set your fees and to generate your revenue. So you're starting from scratch. I recently consulted with a practice. They're in Iowa, and they're a cash-based business, except for they see Blue Cross Blue Shield and they see Medicare. They chose to take Medicare, so they take those two. So as you look at that, with a Blue Cross, for example, that has a fee schedule that's forward-facing, I think, for most states, where you can find that information, let's say, in most states, and Medicare has a forward-facing fee schedule, you'll be able to see that ahead of time. You can make a really good decision on if that rate is acceptable to you. So if you can incorporate a few insurances that pay well, I think that makes a lot of sense. If you're looking to increase the number of patients you see and you see a limitation in staying in cash. So adding one or two insurances and being very specific about making sure that that payment per visit is going to meet the need of your practice before you do it. I would absolutely know what that is before you decide to go from cash to insurance. Really focus on the ones that don't have the administrative burden and pay you enough to do your business. I think that's the starting point. And I think if you have relationships in your state with other private practices, you could probably find that information out just through dialogue with them. Sometimes it's hard to know what your fee schedule is going to be, but I think generally speaking, a payer that pays well to everybody. Generally speaking, a payer that pays poorly to everybody. So you can kind of get a sense through some personal dialogue with people that are in your area that might help you. That's probably what my advice would be, is just make sure you're only adding the insurances that you know are going to help you improve your business.
Sarah, we can pause there. Any follow-up to Randy's answer? You can text it right on in there if you need.
No, greatly appreciate it. Yeah, I'm really small. I only have one patient at current time, but I'm trying to build to start this fall more. But Medicare is probably one that I might have to take, because most of my practice has been geriatrics, and with the limitation of seeing cash-based for Medicare, might be a way to get in patients. But I just greatly appreciate just listening to everybody. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Other questions to throw into our chat? Or follow-up clarifying questions that the group may have now that they've heard some open discussion?
So this is Andrew. You kind of touched on this. I'm just curious about a little bit more detail on some of these metrics. You mentioned earlier, Randy, having a good accounting system and trying to create these categories so that it's easier to identify, what we're looking at and be able to get the data that we need. But do you mind just picking a couple, maybe your top few or your favorites, and how you calculate those metrics, like what you include to calculate those metrics?
So and specifically, Andrew, you're talking about the accounting metrics. So when we're looking at
So like when I
category
look
like
at
what-
cost per visit, I'm looking at basically all of my expenses as a whole, but it sounds like you drill down and look at various different parts of cost and how much cost that costs you per visit as well. And so I was just curious about how you do that. Sounds like you have a pretty elaborate system, and I may not be able to mimic it, but I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, no, you're doing the first of all, if you're doing your total cost per visit, you're doing the right thing. Okay. Because I think it's really important to have all of your costs represented on a cost per visit basis when you're actually looking at payers and how do they pay you. So when I talk about breaking it down, I'm thinking a little bit more about how do I manage my cost per visit. So if you want to set a goal to decrease your cost per visit, how would you manage that? And if you just look at the whole bucket, sometimes it's hard to manage it. So by breaking it down and categorizing like expenses, you can focus on a certain area. And so, when I talked about wage and benefit, if that's important to your practice, let's say you got a practice of 2 clinics and you got 5 therapists, and you're meeting and talking about some initiatives that you want to improve on, and you can express to them how cost per visit makes a difference on your overall revenue and how you can pay them, then sometimes they'll buy into the idea of understanding why that efficiency is important and why that decreases our cost, so that you can be more successful and ultimately pay your employees more and maybe have better benefits. So I think it's more about making sure that if you're gonna actually try to manage something, you need to have a way that's easy to identify what you're managing as it relates to a metric, as it relates to visits or a percentage of revenue. So I think that's probably where I'm going with that. I think when you're looking at contracting, it's really important to know your total cost per visit. That's ultimately your best number, because that's going to tell you the most as to should we take a payer, should we renegotiate with a payer, where really are we? But then when you get into managing, I'd say it's breaking it down and trying to be specific. If you don't know, if you don't really, and we've bought a lot of practices over the years. We've acquired a lot of practices, and I would say the one thing that's really hard to get from these practices are financials. A lot of times it's really hard. Sometimes they're hard to understand. So, and maybe yours aren't like that at all, but I think if you take a little bit of time and organize them in a manner that helps you manage your business, that would be beneficial. But if your intent is to not manage an expense, it might not be helpful to you. I think that's the starting point. Do you want to manage your expenses better? And if you do, how would you manage those? Do you want to start with cost of wages and benefits? Do you want to look at your facility expenses to see if you can lower those? And if you do, how can you lump them together so that you can manage those better? That's how I think about it.
Thank you.
And
Yeah.
did that help, or does it probe a follow-up question, Andrew?
Well, it's funny because however many people we have on this call, we have that many different scenarios, obviously. And you can ask at the outset, well, are you a smaller practice? Are you insurance? Are you cash? Are you 50-50? So I'm in a situation where I'm a very small outfit, myself, one other PT. We're in an environment where we have a few larger players that run really high volume, and so they're willing to contract with everybody because they make up for it by shuffling people
Volume.
through and seeing 2 or 3 patients at once. And we're not that way. So, it makes it tougher. We already are kind of bare bones in terms of expenses. So it is like you talk about managing expenses. I'm like, well, I guess I could set up a tent and start practicing out of a tent, but my wife and I own the building, so I can be, really flexible on the rent for the business. But at some point when I want to move on, somebody else has got to make this work. So it's just a unique situation where there are people we've finally gone out of network with because there's other players in town that just keep on, the visit revenue goes lower and they just keep on seeing the patients because they'll just see 2 or 3 of them at once, and we won't do that. So.
Yeah. So Andrew, how much of your practice is cash?
Oh, I said I was 100% insurance, but it's probably about 10% right now, less than 10%, maybe 8%. I've been in the community a long time. There's a lot of people that know me, and sometimes they're like, hey, I need to get in to see you. And I'm learning to say, well, what's your insurance? Because we've gone out of network on United Healthcare being one. David, I'm glad you guys did well with that. And maybe I need to call them, but they're like on the bottom of my blacklist, or top of my blacklist, the bottom of my good list. So yeah, cash, the only time we get that is when there's someone that really wants to see us because they know us and they love our reputation. And they're like, well, yeah, I mean, I'll take the notes and try to build my insurance.
Yep. It sounds like you're doing the things the right way. And I think I appreciate that. You've chosen what kind of business you're going to have. And that's part of
Right.
this too, right? That's your values. It's your
Yeah.
vision. It's what do you want your practice to be like? And you have chosen this is, I want my practice to be high quality. I want to spend time with patients, and that's going to differentiate me. So that's a pretty cool thing that you're doing it that way too. So, and I think we have to take
But-
that into consideration. That makes a difference.
But what I'm finding is, I look at especially some of the newer physical therapists coming out of school, what their expectations are. I mean, I wish I could find like a mini me because, 25 years ago, I was willing to bust my butt and work really hard to have something. And now these guys come out and they're like, well, I want to make what you make. And I'm like, okay, but I've been doing this longer than you've been alive. And so it's hard to create value that somebody else can appreciate. You talk about an acquisition. I mean, you look at financials and you're like, well, there's a heck of a lot of room here to grow. But I'm like, I don't know if I want to sell out to somebody that's going to just become another huge, the people that are interested in me are someone that's probably willing to really work hard and just have a lot of satisfaction. I mean, I get paid well, but, not as well as
Yep.
I could if I was willing to go high volume. And, anyway,
Yep.
it's weird to think about an exit strategy right now, but that's kind of where I'm at. I have, 10 years ish, and I may need to have to change my business a little bit just to make it
Yep.
something that someone else would want because it's turning and burning a lot of revenue, and then I won't want to stay.
Thanks, Andrew.
Hey, you bet. You guys are awesome. Thank you.
Hey, we're coming up to about the last 10 minutes. And if one thing I know about therapists is your brain is already changing over to your next patient that you're going to see at the top of the hour. So I have one more poll I'm going to put out there. It'll save you going and evaluating this whole practice. It's basically an NPS. That'll be popping up onto the screen. Is we really need to understand as a committee that brings this to you beyond the treatment table, we need your input. So this is brand new this year, and we want to continue to grow it and modify it and bring other educational content to you in different ways. So please feel free to give us the feedback. We need it. We want it, good, bad, or ugly. And then we'll use it to try and better serve you. Is there any other questions while people are finishing out the poll? We probably got time for one more before we'll finish up here, or a follow-up question too.
our financial controller, I won't put her on the spot, but you mentioned the different accounting programs, QuickBooks, Sage, and some other newer one you're using. Can you say a little bit about I'm assuming you've had experience with QuickBooks as well, but with what you guys are using, and you guys are cash based versus accrual.
Yeah, we're cash based. Yep.
And what was the program you used?
We're using Sage Intacct. And it's for us, it's been really good. But I would just I'll give you a perspective here. You know, we used to pay about $5,000 a month or a year for our accounting system when we were using Sage 50. So we're paying about $35,000 a year now. So we had to upgrade our technology to get here. So just to be clear, when you pay more, you get more. We know this in PT EMRs as well. When you pay more, potentially you go to Epic. When you pay less, you might get PT EMRs. So it's the truth in accounting too. So we had to spend more to automate some stuff, but it has been for us, because we have 65 clinics, because we have 600 employees, it's been really good, really helpful, and it's decreased actually our labor in our accounting division overall. So for us, it's paid for itself, but depending on your size, everybody's at a different spot. I think QuickBooks is really common. And I think it can serve your purpose for so many practices. But yeah, so that's what we did.
Thank you. Thanks.
You know, I will just say something really quick. I've already commented on this before with the prior, the Beyond the Treatment Table series that you're doing here. I really do appreciate the investment that you're making as a committee. And it's interesting how, you know, I just blocked out this fourth Thursday or whatever it is today on my schedule, which is really hard for me to do. You know, we do have an issue where we just have lots of people that want to get in. And so we are in a position to renegotiate or go out of network. And what's interesting to me though is it's the whole idea of, I think Covey was the one that said you got to pause and sharpen the saw. And I see this as a very significant saw sharpening experience for me. Every time I'm like, oh, I don't have time to do that. I have like 3 patients I could put into that spot. You know, which one do I do? And my office manager, reception people are like, you know, why are you doing this? And it's because it really does matter. And every time I do it, I think, man, I can't believe I was even considering not taking this hour. And it's not the most convenient time for me, but again, I'm kind of maybe speaking to the choir. I wish I could tell some of these other private practice people out there that this is good stuff. And if nothing else, it just keeps giving me hope that like there's a lot of good people out there. We're trying to do the same thing. So thank you.
Yeah, Andrew, I appreciate your input. And I can see Joan there's a lot of people, we're all in the same boat, right? We're all highly motivated. Back to Amy's point, we all want to see patients. We've all bent over backwards for our patients, but you said a specific thing there too, is there's time that we got to pull out of the business and work on it and work on ourselves as leaders. And as we start to all hear ourselves collectively and start to move forward, move the needle. Yep. That's leadership growth. And I appreciate your input.
Well, and you can't beat the price of this. I mean, you know, I'm already a private practice member. It's just the time it takes.
Yeah.
And what's interesting to me is I think that what I get most out of this is not even necessarily what is said, but it's the thoughts that I generate as something is said. And I have all these notes here to myself. Now I need to go do some follow-up, like, okay, Andrew, how does this apply to you? So, you know, we could have 200 people on this call and we all have 200 different scenarios, but we're all going to get our own ideas, our own inspiration, if you will. And so now I can take it to the next level. I can be that much better. So it's not even as much the specific content or question as what that triggers in Andrew's mind or in David's mind or somebody else's mind. And then we go back to the drawing board and we get with our team and we're like, okay, we're going to do this differently now.
So with that said, Andrew, next month, our topic coincides with marketing. We have Janae Rose as a social media expert. So mark your calendars. Reminder, it is every 4th Thursday of the month at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So be looking for that registration to come out. You know, I would ask, in Andrew, you'd be a great testimonial. If anybody wants to stay on as we conclude this for just a quick video testimonial, those things really work. If we can get those on, there's so many people out there like you, Andrew. So I'll just stick around and we can just grab a quick testimonial But I do want to thank everybody, particularly our content expert, Randy. You're just a plethora of knowledge. Appreciate the time that Rock Valley gave to us today, and appreciate you. So awesome. This will conclude. And if anybody can stay off to give a testimonial, that'd be great.